Welcome, I'm Rose Aguilar, and this is Your Call's Authoritarian Playbook series. Today, we're discussing the status of Project 2025, almost a year into Trump's second term. Last year, we ran a series on Project 2025, a Heritage Foundation-led plan to upend democratic norms, consolidate power, and usher in an authoritarian state. According to the Project 2025 tracker, almost half of Project 2025 proposals have been implemented, including cuts to social services, restrictions on reproductive rights, rollbacks of climate protections, attacks on immigrants, mass firings of civil servants, and more. Some of these policies have cost people their lives. The New Republic's Timothy Noah reports that for an agency that never existed, DOGE did an impressive amount of damage. It shut down the U.S. Agency for International Development, eliminating or placing on administrative leave about 10,000 people. The consequence, according to Boston University epidemiologist Brooke Nichols, was the death of about 640,000 people. 430,000 were children. Here is a statistic you will not find on DOGE's website. For every USAID worker fired, DOGE killed about 64 people. USAID cost American taxpayers $24 a year and saved over 91 million lives globally from 2001 to 2021, according to The Lancet. Joining us to talk about Project 2025 are two guests who have worked tirelessly to get the word out, especially when Trump said he knew nothing about Project 2025. They're now trying to stop further damage from happening. Skye Perryman is a lawyer and president and CEO of Democracy Forward, a national legal organization that goes to court for people and democracy. Last year, Democracy Forward put out the People's Guide to Project 2025. Since Inauguration Day, Democracy Forward has filed over 100 legal actions against the Trump administration. They've blocked ICE raids in houses of worship, uncovered secret deals with El Salvador to disappear people, fought to uncover the cover-up of the Epstein files, and so much more. Hi, Skye. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Hi, it's great to be with you.
We're also joined by Lisa Graves. Lisa is also a lawyer and founder and executive director of True North Research, an investigative watchdog group that works with journalists and researchers to shine a light on the dark money fueling regressive agendas, targeting vital institutions like the courts and public schools. Lisa Graves is co-host of the podcast Legal AF and writer of the Grave Injustice Substack newsletter. She served as senior advisor in all three branches of the federal government. Her latest book is Without Precedent: How Chief Justice Roberts and His Accomplices Rewrote the Constitution and Dismantled Our Rights. Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us. Do we have Lisa? Oh, Lisa just disconnected. We'll get her back in a minute. Skye, let's start off with you. I have to say, I read this piece in the New Republic last night, and these numbers are just devastating. To think that USAID has now been shut down, and this cost taxpayers $24 a year. It has saved so many lives. And according to, there's a lot of different numbers out there, but Boston University epidemiologist Brooke Nichols says that 640,000 people have already died. The New Yorker had a very important piece by Dr. Atul Gawande, along with videos of how these cuts have affected people in different parts of the world. He says hundreds of thousands of people have already died. And then to read this stat in the New Republic, that for every USAID worker who's been fired, DOGE has killed 64 people. I mean, it's really hard to even talk about this, let alone try to get your head around this.
Well, this is why, of course, one of the reasons we have been in court fighting the decimation of USAID, which is agency that truly keeps Americans safe at home and abroad. And the decimation of that agency is certainly devastating to so many people and communities across the world, but also makes the United States less safe. But DOJ overall has been such a failure. I mean, it sort of started with these talking points around trying to make things efficient. And what it has been is an incredibly costly effort that have cost many Americans their jobs, made things worse here at home, and then, of course, has had these global consequences. And in many instances, DOJ hit a lot of, speed bumps and halts in the courts, and it's one of the reasons that it sort of had to shut itself down. But the devastation, of course, is with all of us and is with the country and the world.
Exactly. And to think that all the people that were doing that very difficult work on the ground in places that most people don't even know what some of these programs have done. I mean, the New Yorker has put out incredible videos about bringing clean water to people, about making sure that people have the drugs that they need. And that's stopped. And to think that that has cost so many lives. I also want to talk about healthcare, because healthcare was also in Project 2025. And a lot of people are now waking up to the fact that their healthcare premiums are going to double or triple. In some cases, we're talking about $1,000 a month. And again, this is really difficult to talk about, but we have to. NPR had a piece a couple of weeks ago, and they found that people are calling in to healthcare centers saying that there's an uptick in callers threatening self-harm because they have no idea how they're going to manage to keep their health care because the Republicans refuse to continue the subsidies. So, Skye, I mean, this is hitting people across the board.
And it's what we knew, right? I mean, last year when you and I were talking about Project 2025, it was a project that was deeply unpopular with the vast majority of Americans, including, by the way, Americans who are not particularly progressive or liberal, but Americans that are moderate and conservative. And it's why the president lied on the campaign trail and acted like he didn't know anything about Project 2025 and disavowed an association with it when what this has been is their accelerated playbook. I mean, our team has been in court. We've had to preserve, we've preserved healthcare for over 2.2 million Americans at the hands of this president that continues to try to decimate services for people, which is all part, unfortunately, of a rapidly accelerating autocratic playbook that is seeking to weaken the supports for people, to weaken the national community in order to wield power in very harmful ways. And so that's what so much of the work that we're doing at Democracy Forward and that so many groups are doing alongside us is to help people utilize their power, where that is going to court or being in the streets or voting, in order to push back on this harmful agenda.
And just to remind listeners, in the summer of last year, Trump said, "I know nothing about Project 2025. I have no idea who's behind it. Some of the things they're saying are ridiculous and abysmal. I wish them luck, but I have nothing to do with them." And then on October 2nd, he posted on his Truth Social site, "I have a meeting today with Russ Vogt, he of Project 2025 fame. I cannot believe the radical left Democrats gave me this unprecedented opportunity." I also want to ask you about media coverage a little later in the show, but I believe we have Lisa Graves with us, who is Executive Director of True North Research. Hi, Lisa. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Rose. It's nice to be on. I'm in the middle of a blizzard along with a couple of Zoom challenges, so it's an honor to be on with you and, of course, with Skye.
You're in a blizzard. Where are you right now?
In northern Wisconsin. I think
oh,
we
wow.
got
that's right. I read about that weather.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh. Well, I hope you all stay safe.
Yes, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties, but it's a joy to be on the show with you, Rose.
Well, I'm sorry that we're not starting off on a more positive note, Lisa, but I have to ask you, and this is it's really devastating to talk about this, but we have to get the word out because I think it deserves so much more attention. We were talking earlier about the result of DOJ and the Republican Party and Trump shutting down USAID. And the numbers are coming in. The New Republic cites numbers from Boston University epidemiologist Brooke Nichols, who says that this has resulted in the deaths of about 640,000 people, 430,000 children. And I also want to repeat this again because a lot of people really have no idea how their tax dollars are spent. And they think that thousands and thousands of dollars are being spent on USAID, but that's just not the case. Every taxpayer spends about $24 a year on USAID. So can you first talk about this, Lisa? Just the devastating effects of DOGE and what it has done to people who are in desperate need of basic drugs, of clean water, and now that's all stopped.
It really is extraordinary that this has happened over the past few months, and in essence, the Trump administration and Elon Musk have gotten away with this unilateral action to basically shutter the U.S. Agency for International Development, and to do so without congressional authorization in these devastating ways is really extraordinary. And those reports coming out of the real effort to capture the impact of those dictates on people around the world is just devastating. The fact that so many people have lost their lives because of lack of access to food aid and vital medicine at the whim and caprice of Trump and Musk is genuinely outrageous. Some people have been relying on those medicines, antiviral medicines, to treat AIDS, medicines to treat an array of contagious illnesses, food aid, and more. Some of that food aid was allowed to just basically expire, to rot, because Musk and Trump would rather not have any of the funding going to support people around the world who the U.S. has aided and who are relying on that aid, then basically just slash and trash our agencies. That's just one of the many really devastating, but in fact, singularly devastating effects of this administration in terms of loss of life. But there's more. This administration has also stood in the way of access to contraceptives abroad through their targeting of USAID. This, again, is one of the efforts that was highlighted in the Project 2025 blueprint that Skye was speaking about and that you've covered over these last, several months, more than a year, of what Trump and his team were intending to do if they got power. So this is just one of many examples, but it is one that has proven to be particularly deadly. I would also point out that there are a number of grants, science grants under the National Science Foundation and other parts of the U.S. government where there were ongoing clinical trials to treat cancer, to prevent cancer, to try to cure cancer, for example, along with other very serious diseases and illnesses. And many of those have been disrupted in ways that have fatally damaged those programs, those investigations into life-saving, life-preserving treatment for Americans and people across the world because of the just utter recklessness and disregard exercised by the Trump administration.
In fact, CBS News has a recent piece. Nearly 1 in 30 clinical trials were interrupted by funding cuts to the National Institutes of Health, affecting more than 74,000 patients and research into cancer, infectious diseases, and more, according to a newly published paper that was published in JAMA Internal Medicine. And to bring this home again, to talk about these Affordable Care Act subsidies that the Republican Party refuses to extend. A study from Yale and the University of Pennsylvania found that coupled with cuts to Medicaid could cause more than 50,000 unnecessary deaths every year in this country. And a lot of people are waking up to the fact that their premiums could double or triple. In fact, there's the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Senate Committee finds that a couple in their 60s living in Virginia earning $85,000 a year will pay more than $1,500 more per month. So, Lisa, can you also talk about this? Because some people are saying, I don't know if I can afford this. I don't even know if I'll have insurance because of this.
Yes, this is another really devastating impact of the extraordinary indifference that Trump and the Republicans have shown, quite frankly, to vital healthcare for Americans. When the Affordable Care Act was adopted over a decade ago, it was funded and designed to provide health insurance access to tens of millions of Americans. Those are Americans who may be working in jobs where healthcare is not provided, or they may be in gaps in our healthcare system, people who have retired or who have lost their jobs early and don't qualify yet for Medicare, for example. And so the program that was put in place under the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, which was targeted repeatedly by Donald Trump for repeal, and unsuccessfully so, is now in essence on life support, because with the actions of the Republicans in Congress and Trump's own actions, people are already receiving notice that their health insurance premiums under the exchanges, the healthcare exchanges that were set up in the states to provide access to affordable care, will go up and consume an enormous part of their monthly budget, which means they either won't be able to afford those premiums, or they're not going to be able to afford other things like the medicines they need as a result of the illnesses that people have. And most people in America actually have pre-existing conditions or illnesses that require some sort of medicine and regular ongoing medical treatment, unless you're a really young person. And even young people have gaps in their ability to access health insurance post-college. And the ACA basically has provided access to life-saving care to tens of millions of Americans over the past few decades. And the reports we're seeing of the price increases that are either happening right now or likely to happen if that program is not funded, as Democrats have been fighting for, is not just like a matter of increasing by like 1% or $10 or $20. We're seeing reports that healthcare prices for families could go up by $1,000 or more. And this is at a time when the American people are reeling from the damage that this president has already done to our economy, other than really enriching the high-tech sector, the AI sector. The reality for most Americans is groceries cost more this year than last year. Almost everything costs more. Rent costs more than last year. The ability of people to get health insurance premiums subsidized by the government is about to cost us a whole lot more, unless the president relents and the Republicans go along with Democratic efforts to preserve those subsidies that are life-saving and, in fact, help people thrive.
What are you both hearing on the Hill about this? The New York Times has a piece recently. Trump is considering a push to extend Obamacare subsidies, but has not made a final decision. He's under pressure to do this. Skye, have you heard anything on this?
I mean, look, this is part and parcel for what the president does. He creates a crisis and then wants to sort of come in and act as if he's trying to solve the crisis. He just did the same thing on SNAP, where we had to go to court to secure multiple court orders to force the administration to pay SNAP benefits, when he started by, acting as if he would pay them if he had the legal authority. So he sort of does this. This is a part and parcel of a playbook. It's a very gaslighting playbook to harm people and then to come in and try to act like you're the hero in saving from the very harm that you're creating. And so, but I do think that his allies in Congress are certainly under a lot of pressure, because the American people are starting to feel and see the real harms in their daily lives of this accelerated agenda. But, and I think, we saw the voting results recently. I think, they worry about being held accountable to that. But I think one thing we want to make sure that people in communities across this country are understanding and seeing with their own eyes is the president sort of, trying to start a fire and then come in and pretend like he's the firefighter, when in fact he's the arsonist to begin with. And so that's a trend that I think we're seeing here.
And do either of you know of resources? Because we know that so many people are struggling, and it's hard to say, okay, your premiums are going to go up. You might not be without health insurance. And then what? So what about resources that might be available for people?
I mean, what we are seeing in the communities that we work in is that the resources that are available, and there are people that work every single day to try to help individuals across the country to strengthen communities. Those resources are not going to be enough to offset massive failures of this administration, which has an obligation to govern for all people. And so, one of the main things that people can do right now is to pressure their members of Congress to call, to make their phone calls, to continue to lift their voices about the importance of these upcoming votes and the importance of, the importance of righting this wrong, and to continue to hold the president accountable. I mean, we will do all we can in the courts, but there are not legal solutions to a number of the things that the president is doing to try to harm people. And that's where we really need the American people to step in.
Skye Perryman is a lawyer and president and CEO of Democracy Forward, a national legal organization that goes to court for people and democracy. Last year, Democracy Forward put out the People's Guide to Project 2025. Lisa Graves is also a lawyer and founder and executive director of True North Research. That's an investigative watchdog group. Lisa Graves is author of the new book, Without Precedent, How Chief Justice Roberts and His Accomplices Rewrote the Constitution and Dismantled Our Rights. Today on our Authoritarian Playbook series, we're discussing the status of Project 2025, almost a year into Trump's second term. According to the Project 2025 tracker, almost half of the proposals have been implemented. If you have any questions for our guests about Project 2025, you can give us a call at 866-798-8255. You can also email your call at kalw.org. Taking a step back, when you look at all of the government officials, the government employees who've either left or have been fired, the government agencies that are no longer functioning, what's your overall assessment on where we are? I'm really struck by what I heard in August by M. Gessin. That's the Russian journalist who now lives in the United States and writes a column for the New York Times. M. Gessin told NPR, it took Putin over a decade to consolidate autocratic rule, or put a different way, it took Putin over a decade to do as much as I think Trump has done in 7 months. I was so struck by that, and I still think about it to this day, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are. What is your overall assessment of where we are right now? Why don't you go first, Skye?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a few things. One, in terms of the harm that the administration has done, and Doge and all of these efforts to undermine a government that is supposed to work for people. At Democracy Forward, we have recently launched an initiative called Democracy Works 250 that's about reimagining government, but also that has, a number of fellows that used to serve in the federal government that were fired as a result of Doge, documenting the extent of the harm so the American people can sort of understand that harm as we move forward. But when we think about where we are in the rapidly accelerating autocratic playbook and threat, the sort of rapidly unfolding playbook, one of the ways we look at it is how much of what the president has done has actually been stopped in some way because of the pressure of people, or because of the pressure of people as demonstrated through the courts. And what we are finding is that the courts, and particularly the lower courts, are serving as a really important backstop on this administration. We're in an urgent place, and this playbook is accelerating. But since inauguration, there have been nearly 500 federal court actions, 70 against the president and his harmful policies. About 70% of those have been filed by either Democracy Forward, state AGs, or other organizations that are part of our Democracy 2025 coalition, which now has 650 organizations that are working to ensure that when the president does something that is unlawful, that court action is initiated. Now, you may say, well, what about the Supreme Court? Because the Supreme Court, on its shadow docket, has actually paused some of the most significant court orders that we've been able to achieve. But the vast majority of these cases are not reaching the Supreme Court and are holding things in place, such as federal funding for all people, certain rights and protections. And so what I would say is I think that we are in a rapidly accelerating autocratic threat. I think the president, as he gets more desperate and he as his allies get more desperate, we're going to see him try to do a range of things in 2026, from undermining elections to continuing to depriving people of constitutional rights. But the important thing for people to focus on is the responses that we are seeing are also equally historic, right? Millions and millions of people in the street, largest peaceful mobilizations of people in the history of the United States we've seen this year. The largest and most successful affirmative litigation effort against a president we've seen this year, even with Big Law sitting on the sidelines. And so the message for the American people is we can stop this autocratic threat. We can slow it, we can stop it, we can turn it around, but we all have to get out on the field and continue to use the power that we have. And so that's really where we are focused. But it is quite devastating when you look at the harm that we're seeing to the people across the country.
We'll get Lisa Graves to respond after a quick break. We'll also talk about protests that Skye was discussing. We'll talk about environmental regulations that have been overturned. The Times has a piece recently about the Trump administration taking action on this issue. Here's the headline. In 1 week, Trump moves to reshape U.S. environmental policy. The administration moved to weaken the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act, two bedrock laws, among other deregulatory moves. Skye Perryman is a lawyer and president and CEO of Democracy Forward. Lisa Graves is a lawyer and founder and executive director of True North Research, author of the new book, Without Precedent, How Chief Justice Roberts and His Accomplices Rewrote the Constitution and Dismantled Our Rights. This is Your Call's Authoritarian Playbook series. I'm Rose Aguilar. We'll be back after this. This is Your Call's Authoritarian Playbook series. I'm Rose Aguilar. Today we are discussing the status of Project 2025, almost a year into Trump's second term. We're talking with Skye Perryman, lawyer and president and CEO of Democracy Forward, a legal organization that goes to court for people and democracy. Last year, they put out the People's Guide to Project 2025. Lisa Graves is a lawyer, founder and executive director of True North Research. She's co-host of the podcast Legal AF, writer of the Grave Injustice Substack newsletter. Her latest book is Without Precedent, How Chief Justice Roberts and His Accomplices Rewrote the Constitution and Dismantled Our Rights. What are your thoughts, Lisa? What is your overall assessment on where we are, and what do you think is to come in 2026?
Well, I agree with Skye, and I just want to take a moment to underscore the extraordinary work that she's been engaged in with her team in defense of our liberties, in defense of our Constitution. It really is some of the most important work we've seen over the past year, the litigation initiatives that she and others have made to try to protect our rights. And as she pointed out, the lower courts are doing their job for the most part and following the law. You know, they're issuing temporary restraining orders where they're finding that unilateral actions by Trump seem to be in violation of the Constitution or statutes or regulations or contracts, and where those actions have been shown to cause irreparable harm if they're allowed to proceed. But we are seeing something we've never seen before in American history, which is a U.S. Supreme Court that is basically acting like an appendage to Donald Trump. It's usurping congressional power, and it is aggrandizing itself while also aggrandizing Trump's power. We saw that with the decision last year to give Donald Trump unprecedented immunity from criminal prosecution. That counter-constitutional ruling helped pave the way for Trump's return to power and emboldened him. It sort of opened the door to the authoritarianism. It really, in fact, opened the door to the authoritarianism that we're seeing unfold in America for the first time with the blessing of the highest court in the land. In this past 10 months, we've seen the U.S. Supreme Court intervene repeatedly to block lower court rulings that were well grounded in the facts and well grounded in longstanding law that temporarily restrained Donald Trump. There were 24 emergency docket rulings that Trump won the effect of that is not to ultimately win, in the sense that the final decisions have not been issued in those cases. But the immediate effect is that Donald Trump's actions that have been challenged in a number of these really significant cases, but not all of them, as Skye pointed out, many, many other court orders are still standing. But in some of these signature cases, the Supreme Court, helmed by John Roberts, has enabled the kind of authoritarian apparatus that Donald Trump has been implementing with his deployment of immigration agents in our cities, with his deployment of the military in our cities, in ways that violate longstanding legal practices, longstanding traditions, and according to lower court judges, and I agree, in violation of longstanding law. And so we are at a moment in our country where, unlike in Trump 1.0, before 3 justices were added to the Supreme Court at Trump's behest, people who were handpicked by Leonard Leo, the person who helped, direct billionaires' money to basically capture this court. In Trump 1.0, the Supreme Court still did not have this sort of 6-person supermajority with 3 Trump appointees. The decisions we're seeing now are the decisions of that John Roberts court, that 6-3 court with 3 Trump people on the court. And what we've seen this court do is create sort of a pincer, in essence. The first part was this immunity ruling, this unprecedented ruling last year. And then it's been joined by a series of extraordinary orders emboldening Trump, expanding Trump's powers in ways that no president has ever had, and deferred to in ways that are really damaging and destructive to our democracy. But at the same time, we've seen extraordinary, courageous, beautiful actions by millions of Americans coming out for the No Kings marches, the nonviolent proceedings to stand up to this administration. We've seen countless acts of ordinary people acting courageously in response to injustice, in response to people being accosted without cause, without an actual judicial warrant, without any indication that they violated any federal law. We've seen, humorous and, amazingly talented people try to respond with joy in the face of these destructive policies, to try to highlight that Trump's claims about lawlessness in the cities are simply false. And the reality is that he is trying to use that as a pretext to exert unprecedented power over the federal government in our lives, in our communities. And we have also seen the amazing power of boycotts, for example, in response to taking Jimmy Kimmel off the air, and how people responded at Disney, and how Disney folded in response to that public opposition by people across the country to that effort, at the behest of Trump and his FCC commissioner, to, in essence, censor our television shows. So there are many, many signs of hope, including the surge in victories for Democrats, in my personal opinion, in this November election. But we're not out of the woods, and we need to have court reform, reforming the U.S. Supreme Court and restoring our rights, including restoring and expanding our voting rights, at the top of our efforts, in order to overcome the authoritarianism that the Roberts Court has allowed to take hold in the form of Donald Trump's administration. And that's why I helped launch and help found Court Accountability, in order to help make the case for the vital necessity of court reform, reforming the Supreme Court, along with things like the No Kings Act, and restoring our rights in a host of areas, including reproductive rights, environmental issues, and more.
To your point about protests, Lisa, I've been watching veterans who've been taking to the streets. There's a 24/7 sit-in at Union Station in Washington, D.C. by veterans who are demanding an end to the deployment of the National Guard in the Capitol. And I've been somewhat surprised this hasn't gotten more media attention. On Veterans Day, there were so many rallies across the country. And then last weekend, there were 3 days of actions, lobbying and then a big protest on Saturday. It was a remove the regime protest. I mean, they're calling for the impeachment of Trump. And these are veterans. And so it's just not getting much media attention. And I just wonder from both of you, and then we'll talk about abortion and the environment. What are your thoughts about media attention of these protests, and then media attention really of, and it's a big question, but how these policies have been implemented so quickly after, Trump saying, I don't know anything about Project 2025, or we're going to allow the states to deal with abortion, which is not the case. So we know that he says one thing and does another thing. So what are your thoughts about protests, media coverage specifically of protests, and then media coverage of how quickly all of this has happened? What are your thoughts, Skye?
I mean, the one thing I'll start by saying is that we have a fractured media environment, right? Americans are no longer getting their media from central places. And so as a result of that, it is at times hard to see even what we are talking about when you say media coverage, right? Because we're certainly seeing, and this has been very, I think, really inspirational, but we're seeing millions of Americans record what is happening in their communities, whether those are protest and resistance, whether that is the bad actions of government officials and mask agents, right? And post those on media that people, digitally, where people are obtaining their media. And then you have, the segmented, you have the segmented sort of more traditional media community. And so I do think that so much of what has enabled Donald Trump and his administration. And of course, we see the FCC trying to use under, a Project 2025 author, Brendan Carr, right, trying to use the FCC in ways to sort of intimidate networks and in all sorts of improper ways. And so I do believe that sort of this environment has certainly aided and abetted the administration. And the MAGA movement has been very active in trying to put forward a range of misinformation and disinformation. That said, I think it's also been incredibly inspiring to see the journalists that are covering this and people really with their own devices, right? Documenting what is happening and putting that out to see. And then, of course, you see the elections recently in November show what we're seeing for those that are paying attention in the streets and in communities across this country. I mean, there is data that suggests that there is more consistent protesting in areas that carried, that were carried for Trump in this time in red areas than there ever was in the first Trump administration at any point. And so I think that there are a lot of positive signs about people and the activism and the way in which people are coming forward. But I do think that we are pushing up against a fractured media landscape, and one that at times is intentionally designed to undermine that type of coverage.
Lisa, what are your thoughts?
Well, I confess to being routinely disappointed by the way commercial media covers dissent in America. This is a long-standing critique I've had, and I'm sure many of your listeners have had as well, where, there's a lot of coverage of what one MAGA person may think, at a diner in Iowa. But when millions of Americans come out to protest, to stand in peaceful dissent in defense of our Constitution, there's actually very little coverage happening on the local news or in the mainstream newspapers. There's a bit, and some places, particularly progressive media and public media, tend to cover those actions better than some of the other outlets. So that's definitely a problem, because I think people have a hard time seeing how much dissent there actually is happening. And as Skye points out, it's happening all over the country in, red and blue towns and cities where people know that America is on the wrong track, where they're very concerned about the actions that Trump has taken on across a number of issues, and where people from all walks of life are standing up and speaking out and wanting to have their voices heard. But there are ways in which new media is helping to bring people together, helping to inspire people, helping to have a format for people to see these courageous actions, these beautiful actions, the brilliant signs and marches and rallies of Americans across the country and be inspired by them. And in fact, this movement, I think, is growing. And you can also see it in how Trump's approval ratings have been falling to basically historic lows, even though he continues to have a hardcore set of MAGA supporters who I think in many instances are not seeing some of the things that are really happening in America, in American cities and towns to people across the country, and who are not necessarily experiencing the economic hardship that Trump's policies are causing. So I definitely think we need, better coverage by some outlets of the reality of how many Americans really are not on board with these extreme policies and who are acting lawfully and creatively and courageously in response. But we're also seeing ways in which this new, in some ways it's not so new, this new social media environment allows us to connect to each other in ways that aren't just filtered by a handful of network news stations or a handful of newspapers. And so there are some positives in there. And I also do think you can see it in the voting results, where you see turnout in some places surging. You see people who are thinking about voting not just as a one-time act once a year, but as a longer-term part of being a citizen in American society, of civic engagement. And we're also seeing other things happen, like jury nullification, where the jury in Washington, D.C. refused to convict the man who threw the Subway sandwich, in spite of the fact that the Justice Department, the Trump administration, wanted to pursue that case. And so there are a lot of signs of hope in the very difficult times that we're in. And I just think we have to redouble our efforts to share those signs of hope with our friends and family so that people know they're not alone.
And we should just remind listeners, speaking of media, that FCC head Brendan Carr authored the section of Project 2025's policy that deals with the FCC. Another portion of it urges Congress to defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which they did. And in October, it was the first month when we and all public radio stations no longer got their government funding. And so it's just important to remember that, because it's easy to forget because things are moving so quickly. Today, we're joined by Lisa Graves, founder and executive director of True North Research, Skye Perryman, president and CEO of Democracy Forward. We are talking about the status of Project 2025, almost a year into Trump's second term. According to the Project 2025 tracker, about half of the proposals have been implemented. We've got just about 8 minutes left. What else stands out for both of you? Just to say a few things about abortion and reproductive rights. The Wisconsin Independent had a piece in May. In first 100 days, Trump's moves on abortion echoed Project 2025 Playbook. Again, Trump said that he would leave the issue of abortion to the states. And a lot of people that support abortion rights, which is about 75% of the country, according to many polls, still voted for him because he said he would leave it to the states. So here's what he's done. In March, the U.S. Department of Justice notified defendants in U.S. versus the state of Idaho. This is a lawsuit that was filed under Biden over Idaho's abortion law, that it was dropping the suit. Idaho law bans abortion with few exceptions, and that law conflicts with the Federal Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act, or EMTALA. That requires hospitals that receive funding under Medicare to stabilize emergent patients, including those requiring an abortion. So that's medical emergencies. 4 days after he took office, Trump issued an executive order to enforce the Hyde Amendment. That's a restriction on the use of federal funds for abortion. And then I didn't even know about this one. In January, just 3 days after taking office, Trump pardoned 23 anti-abortion activists who were convicted on charges of blocking clinics in Washington, D.C., Tennessee, Michigan, and New York City. So what really stands out for you on reproductive health care, Skye?
Well, look, this has never been a president or an administration that's about the health of people, of families, or of communities, and especially not the health of women and other people who require reproductive health care, including contraception and abortion care. So this is what we've seen. And the EMTALA example is a really good one of the callous links that the administration is going to undermine the safety and health of women and of people and of mothers, right? These are mothers, these are people in many instances who are facing, well, in all instances, are facing very emergent complications within their pregnancy that can create massive concerns for their life and health. Many people already have children, and their families are being faced with a choice of, and with a necessity of the health care they need. Pregnant people are not excluded from the protections of EMTALA, even though this administration has sought to exclude them. When you go to an emergency room, you get the stabilizing care you need. That is the federal law. And this administration, is undermining that at every turn. They are pretty tactical and smart about how they do these things. They know that there is very little public support for an anti-science and anti-choice agenda. They know that people have seen the devastation in their own families and communities post-Dobbs, and that many people were already seeing that devastation as a result of many, unnecessary restrictions across the country that existed even pre-Dobbs. And so the administration is taking a range of steps that are often under the radar, seeking to manipulate science and evidence at the Food and Drug Administration, seeking to discredit longstanding medical research and evidence about, for instance, the effectiveness of mifepristone, which is a matter that we work on, doing things like, flipping positions in cases or abandoning the protections of federal laws like EMTALA, but trying to do them in ways where they're not drawing lots of attention to it. And so it's very important that the American people be vigilant about this, that we call the question every time we can. There was concerning data during the campaign that many Americans did not believe that this president would restrict and restrain and unnecessarily restrict and restrain reproductive health care. And we're seeing that they're doing it. The Dobbs is, Roe v. Wade was overturned because of justices that this president handpicked for the Supreme Court. But I think that these examples and you highlighting these examples are really important for folks to understand.
Lisa, what would you add in about a minute?
Well, I would just say,
Sorry.
No, it's all good because Skye really covered it. And it really is a joy to be in this battle alongside Skye and others, because that was precisely right. And there's more about those details on the HHS part of that Project 2025 tracker. And it's just one of many issues that, have changed dramatically because of the regressive agenda of this administration. And there's more to come until we put up some more firewalls to protect our rights. And that includes on environmental issues as well. And so I'd love to come back on with you, Skye, and with you, Rose, to talk about the array of things this administration is doing to really harm our natural environment in ways that are irreparable if they proceed. But let me just stand on what Skye said and defer to what she said. She was exactly right.
And on the environment, and we're going to do so many more shows about this, the NRDC has a piece out recently. Since the Trump administration took office, it has taken or proposed at least 380 actions that directly threaten the environment, climate, and human health. The NRDC is doing an amazing job of tracking all of this. Just under agriculture and food, there's so many. They've got buildings, clean air, climate adaptation, climate change, drinking water, equity and justice, fossil fuels, fresh water, lands and wildlife, oceans. I want to read just a couple here to give the ocean a voice. The Interior Department released its 5-year plan for offshore oil and gas drilling. The U.S. Department of the Interior said it would not conduct National Environmental Policy Act reviews for offshore federal oil and gas lease sales, mandated by the administration's disastrous tax law. It just goes on and on. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management announced the areas off American Samoa and the Northern Mariana Islands that is considered for offshore mineral lease sale, the first such auction in more than 30 years. It is very hard to keep up with this because there's so much. And I want to read an email from Vicky about protest. Vicky writes, I stumbled accidentally on a YouTube video of the Saturday rally, Impeach, Convict, Remove at the Capitol. What a difference from January 6th. I looked in vain for coverage of any mainstream media. It's happening, finally. Major media is going to be embarrassed. The two major corporate parties will be embarrassed. Well, thank you for that, Vicky, because we're definitely covering these veteran protests. Your final thoughts? We've got a number of emails. Eileen writes about what's happening at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We have a caller from Patrick. We didn't have time. Why don't we impeach the Supreme Court? And then a number of people writing and saying, what can we do about this? Because it's happening so quickly and it's so hard to keep up. What are your thoughts on that, Skye? We've got about 30 seconds.
I mean, look, I think that for folks to sort of keep up with things, Lisa, can you remind us of your website? There's a range of folks that are doing great work where you can sort of go and keep up. Lisa, I know you have one on 2025.
Well, we got courtaccountability.org, and we do have some Project 2025 assets that are on that site. And you all have tremendous resources as well, Skye. So let me give you the last word on that.
Yeah. And so obviously, Lisa's got Court Accountability. We've got a website. I mean, you can always go to Democracy Forward and sign up and follow. And we really do try to provide information and ways to take action that's not overwhelming, but that is factual and effective. But I would also encourage you to go to democracy2025.org, which is the 650 organizations that are doing this litigation, that are looking at what the executive branch is doing, seeking to how to respond. There are ways that you can track that there that I think is less overwhelming and more accurate than what you may get in other sources. And one of the things that we want everyone to pay attention to is that this is a strategy by this administration to help for people to believe that they do not have power and to try to convince people that there's nothing that they can do. Mm-hmm. And so every single day we have to resist that and defy that. And we can do that by working together.
Democracy Forward, Skye Perryman, True North Research's Lisa Graves. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for joining us. I'm Rose Aguilar. It's your call.